In this video, we'll be investigating parameter changes. I'll be using my graphing calculator, and then we'll sketch the graph of each of these from my calculator. The first one is y equals the square root of x. We can see that the graph starts at the origin and is a smooth curve to the right. We know that if x is 1, y is 1, and if x is 4, y is 2. So our curve looks like this. Now we're going to change the parameter so that instead of the square root of x, we have the square root of negative x. So this looks like when we negate the x, our graph is reflected across the y-axis. So this one goes like this. Let's check what happens when I negate, and this is basically negating the y if I multiply both sides by -1. But if you can think in terms of putting the negative outside of the function, so we have negative square root of, and then I want to keep just x there inside. So that one is when we negate outside of the function, it looks like a reflection across the x-axis. Let's try. Now this one, we're putting a negative outside the function, and also we're negating the x value. And this one went from the curve up in quadrant 1 to the curve in quadrant 3. So we're reflecting across the y-axis and also across the x-axis. Let's look at what happens when I subtract 3 from the x and it's inside the radical. On this one, when I subtract 3 from the x, so -3 moves my graph right 3 units. And then we should be able to extrapolate from this information that this one will move it left 5 units. Let's see if it does. Yes. And notice that the curve stays the same. It's just picked up and moved left 5 units. Beginning point is at -5. And then now in this one, we're adding 4 to the basic square root of x graph. So this parameter moves my graph up 4 units. So if we extrapolate out again, this should move our graph down 2 units. Let's see if it does. Yes, it does. Let's review and do a couple problems. We're working with the basic square root of x graph. When we change the sign of x, that reflects across the y-axis. when we negate outside the function, that reflects across the x-axis. When we negate both inside and outside, that reflects across the y-axis and also across the x-axis. When we subtract a number from x inside the function, it moves it right 3. And when we add inside the radical, that moves it left 5, or however many you add. And then when we add outside of the function, so our function is here, and then we add or subtract a number from that function, this moves it up and down. So this one goes up 4, and this one goes down 2. Let's see if we can figure out what this will do before we put it in our calculator. The negative inside the radical is going to reflect across the y-axis. And then adding 6 out here outside the function should make it go up 6. So let's just see. And we're going to reflect across the y-axis, so we'll be over on the left side here. Going up 6 would put my beginning point for my square root right there. So my graph should look like this. So we have identical graph. Let's do one more here. Now a negative sign out in front of the radical should reflect across the x-axis. And then subtracting 2 should move it right 2. And then adding 3 outside should move it up 3. So let's see. Now I'm going to take that initial point that's usually at the origin. Then if I move it right 2 and up 3, that'll put my initial point for the square root graph right there. And then this point, because it's going to be heading down since I reflected across the x-axis. So it might help you to draw the reflected graph. The reflected graph will be right here. So if you reflect your graph and then move it right 2 units, every point on that curve, and up 3 would get me to this black curve. Now if we look to see if that's what it looks like, I have a negative out in front, and then x minus 2, and then plus 3 on the end. And that's my black curve right there.